All right, you guys, happy Tuesday, and listen up because it's official. Xavier Poussard, the author of Becoming Brigitte, has officially been sued by Brigitte Macron, and it's for cyberbullying. Cyberbullying. Huh? And in the official report that she's filed with the police, I get an honorable mention, so I'm going to tell you all about that. Also, the Trump administration is all over the place right now. They're like, look over here, the MLK files, we're releasing them today. Look over here. Have you guys been following the Brian Kohlberg stabbings in Idaho? Yeah, well, we're demanding answers. Look everywhere. But over there, I don't know, guys, it's starting to feel like they're saying a lot of words to really just come out and say that they want us to move on from Jeffrey Epstein. And here's the thing. No. Just no. So today we continue our series looking into the Epstein files. So look, this is going to be controversial. My podcast is controversial, but I've got to tell you a story, and you are going to want to listen to this. It's a story about a young Hungarian boy. His name is Miklos, okay? Miklos had a bit of misfortune in his life, and I'll be clear, that's putting it lightly, because at just 15 years of age, in the midst of World War II, he and his family were sent into a Polish work camp. I want to be clear, this was in April of 1944, so not long before the end of the war. But he and his family, along with 17,000 other terror-stricken Hungarians, were forcefully made to commute into a camp which would later come to be known as Auschwitz. Miklos was transferred alongside his brother, his mother, his father, and almost as soon as they arrived, he recounts that his mother and his younger brother were separated from him and eventually killed very quickly. He also recounts how he and his father were then made to shave their heads. They were given white tags with numbers that were on them, black numbers that were made out of cloth. Later on, he would tell that from that day forward, he lost his identity. He was no longer Miklos. He became a number. That number was 11104. Like I said, they were made to change into these working clothes, and eventually they had those numbers tattooed upon their skin. Eventually, because of the working conditions, his father just grew too weak. It was just the most insane things that they were made to endure every day physically. And so his father says to his son, look, I'm not going to make it. I'm not going to survive the labor of this camp, but I want you to make me a promise. I'm paraphrasing here, but he makes Miklos promise him that if Miklos ever makes it out of the camp, he wants Miklos to commit himself to telling the world the truth regarding what they suffered. What happens next is that his father is then selected to be exterminated because he's no use, he's too weak. And Miklos says that he felt his entire body and his soul were then just worn out from this news. He then goes and he finds two other inmates who had befriended his father throughout this time, and their names were Abraham and Lazar. Abraham and Lazar Wiesel. Abraham had the number 7712 tattooed upon him, and Lazar had the number 7713 tattooed upon him. The two brothers made a promise to Miklos that they would take care of him in his father's absence, and sure enough, his father was then killed. But the three of them, they were now a band of brothers. Months later, they were informed that the Russians had managed to break through, and in January of 1945, the order came in that it was time to leave Auschwitz. Now, those who didn't have the strength to make the journey, which was going to be a very long walk, 30 kilometers in the snow, they would be left to die. They either were going to make that walk or they weren't. Like I said, through snow and through the cold. And then what happens is 30 kilometers later, they're crammed onto trains, and many of them die from various ailments until finally those that survive that long journey arrive at Buchenwald, a different camp. It was there that Miklos is reunited with Lazar, and he learns, unfortunately, that Lazar's brother Abraham did not make the journey. He was not strong enough. Here's what happens next. Days later, they are liberated by U.S. soldiers. Now, Americans listening to this, we know this story. We know the story of a liberation. It is on the fourth day of liberation that American soldiers rush into block number 57, where both Lazar and Miklos are bunked. And the American soldiers take a photo. It would become one of the most famous photos ever captured of Liberation Day. You've probably seen this photo before. After a medical exam, he again loses track of his friend Lazar. Miklos is diagnosed with tuberculosis, and he begins a long road to recovery. He gets treated in Switzerland, and he would later recount how it really took him years to treat the psychological effects, having to adapt to normal behavior again in the world. Fast forward 45 years later, and it's 1986, and a man named Elie Wiesel is awarded a Nobel Peace Prize for his work documenting the atrocities that he survived at Auschwitz. He had told the world that he was one of the inmates in the now famed liberation photo. So Miklos, who is now going by the name Niklaus, like Nicholas, begins receiving all these phone calls from journalists asking if he would like to meet up with his old inmate from Buchenwald, Elie Wiesel. A newspaper editor says, hey, we will even fly you to the Grand Hotel in Sweden for this reunion. We want to capture this reunion. And he's on the phone, and Niklaus he's a bit confused. He's going, Elie Wiesel. The newspaper editor informs him that Elie Lazar Wiesel was due to receive the Nobel Prize and that they would arrange that meeting for him to see his old friend on December 14th at the Grand Hotel. Suddenly, he is overcome with joy. I mean, can you imagine having survived that? You have lost touch. It's now some 40 plus years later. He recounts that he felt joy and he felt honor. 4 days later, his flight is booked and he soon boards that plane to Stockholm, where he recounts that he is thinking deeply on the plane about what's he going to say to this guy? Man, I haven't seen him in so many years. What can I tell Lazar? What can we give one another having survived this unique experience? And then finally, he says the flight went by so quickly, he hardly remembers it. Then finally that moment arrived for them to meet in the Grand Hotel. I'm going to quote him directly now. He writes, quote, after about 10 minutes waiting, the door opened and beyond expectation, in came a man of my own age, heading towards me with a smile on his face saying hello. I returned the smile, but I did not know to whom I was smiling at. The question regarding a handshake was hanging in the air. I made a quick move in reaching out with an attempt to shake hands with him, to say hello to him, and I finished up saying, delighted to see you. He said, Elie. I asked him in half Jewish, he means Yiddish, and half English, what language he would prefer to speak in. Jewish, I said. He replied, no. Then I asked him if Hungarian would suit him better, and he said, I can't speak Hungarian. Okay, I said, then we'll take it in English. And he opened up conveying regards from a rabbi living in Israel who was previously stationed in Sweden. His part of the performance started in front of the cameras, which I would say was professionally carried out. He was a master of his job. He's referring, of course, to Elie. All of a sudden, the reporter and the photographer joined the conversation, asked if we knew one another from before. I said no, and Elie agreed with my statement. Elie then hands him a signed copy of his book, Night. Niklaus Gruner is completely gobsmacked. He soon realizes that he's been set up as a moment of profound propaganda for this stranger who is not Lazar, who he was in the camp with. Anyways, he leaves and he begins reading the book Night, and soon after realizes that man, Elie, is not only an imposter, but he's also a fraud. He reads the book and is shocked at the stories that he is telling that he says certainly didn't happen while he was there. He writes, quote, I had never seen, referring to Auschwitz, or even come close to ditches burning with open fire where people or children could be seen burning on my way to the washroom in Auschwitz, as written in Night by Elie Wiesel. Neither was it possible for boys of my age and with a weight of only 25 kilos to chase and to rape German women in Weimar as claimed in Night, after the continual treatment of bromide used to minimize our sexual desires? In Night, Elie Wiesel also recounts how he, a 15-year-old Hungarian boy, threw out his Hungarian passport in front of the guards close to the Polish-Ukrainian border. Niklaus laughed at that part because, as he writes, quote, it would have immediately led to death, especially then if a Hungarian passport was even in the hands of a Jewish boy in Hungary. Not to mention that a boy of 15 years was still counted as a child and was therefore entered into his father's passport if he had one. Furthermore, according to my knowledge, a Hungarian passport was protected by law against abuse, and an improper treatment would lead to a very heavy fine. Besides, one had to be at least 23 years old to hold a passport then, end quote. Niklaus then spends the rest of his life dedicated to exposing this fraud, Elie Wiesel, who he claims stole the identity of his friend, eventually culminating into a book by Niklaus entitled Stolen Identity. And he has that number, A7713, where he then reveals throughout his entire life, he then dedicates it to telling the truth. He reveals that Elie doesn't even have a tattoo. Hungarian news would confirm that. Multiple pictures show Elie wearing short sleeves, doesn't have a tattoo, which was required, at least according to Niklaus, for all of the inmates to have. He goes through lawsuits. He's suing the Hungarian government. He starts to believe that there is some conspiracy to try to platform this guy. He sues rabbis for libel. I mean, when I say he dedicates the rest of his life to exposing this Nobel Prize winner as a fraud, that's exactly what he did. And then he says he's not surprised because when Elie Wiesel eventually dies, they bury him very quickly, too quickly. And he says, yeah, they did that because if journalists had been allowed in to see his body, they would have noted that he did not have a tattoo. No, this guy stole the identity of a Holocaust survivor. So who is this Elie Wiesel who allegedly steals this identity? Who steals identities, no less, and then makes up these stories, which, by the way, it is confirmed that he fictionalized stories in his book, Night. Well, as I told you guys before, Elie Wiesel was the cousin of Robert Maxwell. Man, a man of many names, as we told you before. Man of many identities, like we told you before. And therefore, Elie Wiesel becomes a very curious piece of the Epstein story. Now enter Ghislaine Maxwell's mother, because that's how this connects. Again, this is Robert Maxwell's wife. I'm going to tell you about her. She is known as Betty. She was born on March 11th, 1921 in Saint-Alban-de-Roche, in France. Her full name is Elizabeth Jenny Jeanne Maynard, and she comes from wealth. She comes from a Lyon line of silk weaving industrialists, which were founded by her ancestor, a Swiss Calvinist merchant named Samuel Debar. Now, Elizabeth Maynard would go on in her life to explain how this mixed marriage, obviously, she was a Calvinist Christian and he was a Jew, and how the religious question arose between them as soon as they met. And she says that Robert Maxwell was relieved that she was a Protestant and not a Catholic. She writes that it seemed to have relieved him because on the whole, Protestants were not anti-Semitic, but, the Catholics were. So the story goes that she then commits herself to learning Hebrew, and she really throws herself into Robert Maxwell's ancestry. And of course, therefore, the Holocaust. Now, I should tell you now that Robert Maxwell, it may come as a shock to you, but he was not the only fraud in the Maxwell clan. Because after his exceedingly well-timed death, his wife opted to sit down for a very long, rather dramatic interview with Vanity Fair. And in this, you can see it's entitled The Sinking of Captain Bob. And she kind of gloriously arrives sitting in one of their mansions. I'm going to read directly from this article because I love this. I like to picture her, just very dramatic. The reporter writes, "She was sitting on the edge of a chintz-covered love seat, sipping tea and staring at me over the rim of her cup with her cool, teal blue eyes. We were talking about how the whole of British society seemed to be gloating over the fall of House of Maxwell. Some newspapers reported that Betty Maxwell had closed her Oxford mansion with its soaring stained glass window depicting Maxwell as Samson at the gates of Gaza and absconded to her thatch-roofed chateau near Bergerac in the southwest of France. But in fact, the iron-willed matriarch of the Maxwell family was still living in her adopted land, shuttling from lawyer to lawyer in an effort to unravel the tangled skin of her husband's financial affairs and to salvage whatever she could of her own inheritance. Elsewhere in the interview, she declares, quote, "They say that I have 500,000 pounds. Those are lies. I haven't anything." Oh, really? We're going to fact check that after we take a quick break. Throw it to our sponsors. Foremost Preborn, because I've told you guys before and I'll say it again, I am pro-life. That means I stand with mothers before their baby is born and long after that. And that's exactly why I partner with Preborn. Preborn is not out to judge women. They're making motherhood possible. They provide free ultrasounds. They share the gospel of Jesus Christ. And most importantly, they stay after the baby is born with real practical support by giving expecting mothers diapers, baby clothes, even housing and financial help for up to 2 years after their baby is born. And because that is what true Christ-centered compassion looks like. Here's how you can be a part of that. With just $28, you will give a mom a free ultrasound, one chance to see her baby. And when she does, she's twice as likely to choose life. Preborn is on a mission to rescue 70,000 babies this year. Don't just say that you're pro-life. You can actually live it if you donate now. Call 855-601-2229, or you can head to preborn.com/Candace. Again, that's preborn.com/Candace. Also reminding you guys about GNO Land, because what if smart contract platforms weren't controlled by elites or big tech? What if they were built by and for real builders, the people? That's the question that GNO Land asked, and that's why they built GNO Land. They started with Golang, a language real-world developers that already use, and they built a new platform around it. It's transparent, intuitive, and it just makes sense. Not some confusing system of ones and zeros. It's open source, so you can imagine GitHub, but designed for on-chain collaboration and composability. Builders actually get credit for their work, and they get rewarded every time their code gets used. That's the real value, not likes, not clout, actual reward. So you can visit GNO Land. They rejected proof of stake, which is a system where the rich run the show. They went with proof of authority instead. ADAO, where contributors, not bad actors or Silicon Valley, actually call the shots. GNO Land is open, fair, and honestly pretty unstoppable. So if you're a builder, a freedom lover, or just tired of rigged platforms, please check it out by visiting gno.land/Candace. Again, that's gno.land/Candace. Okay, now we're going to jump back. Betty Maxwell, husband, right as the walls are closing in upon him. They're starting to investigate him. They're realizing, oh my gosh, the pensions are missing. And conveniently timed death. And now they're saying, oh, guys, we just need time to mourn. Oh, I can't believe people think that I knew anything about it, Betty is telling this Vanity Fair reporter. I know nothing about what happens in Liechtenstein. I know nothing. I have nothing. Well, the truth is actually that Betty was not broke. Betty did not have nothing. She was not broke at all. She'll never know a day of her life of what it means to be broke. As Xavier Poussard reveals in his forthcoming book about Epstein, despite the generally accepted story that after insurers refused to pay out the life insurance for her husband because it was assumed he had committed suicide, Elizabeth wrote a book called Tout soleil est amer, which means all the sun is bitter, about her chaotic family life. She also recounts how Ghislaine Maxwell, her daughter, had been treated for anorexia, like a laboratory rat, etc., all these stories. And it was told that those book sales allowed the family to survive. But the truth, as revealed in part by the Financial Times in 1992, is that she also inherited 3 apartments in France. It's also revealed years later that the will forgot to include the part where multiple properties were given to her, as well as hectares of land and forests, actually, that Robert Maxwell had acquired in his wife's name before he disappeared or committed suicide or whatever we're supposed to believe. And beyond that, it would be discovered that a financial war chest had been sheltered away for her with the complicity of the Labour member of Parliament, a guy named Jeffrey Robinson. If you're in the UK, you might be familiar with that name because he was the former boss of Jaguar. Yes, like the car. He was also an ex-Soviet agent. He would then go on to become the future paymaster general under Prime Minister Tony Blair, very corrupt prime minister, and the Peter Mandelson, that duo. Anyways, the point is that she was far from financially ruined. So this was a performance. She was wealthy from the day she was born up until the day that she met Robert Maxwell through to the day that she died. And while she lived, I should tell you now, going back to his cousin, Elie Wiesel, she sort of rather obsessed herself with documenting the horrors of the Holocaust. In fact, according to Xavier Poussard and various other sources, it was under pressure from Betty that Robert Maxwell, while he was robbing the UK hardworking people of their pensions, he commissioned Churchill's meticulous biographer, a guy named Martin Gilbert, a professor at Harvard, to draw up an atlas of the Holocaust, which was then published by Pergamon Press in 1988. Remember, Pergamon Press, as we know, was a deep state operation. They sent Robert Maxwell into Germany. He acquires this magazine, renames it the Pergamon Press. And so suddenly they're publishing an atlas of the Holocaust in 1988, specifically all the places and all the original figures of the persecution. She also worked with Yad Vashem in Jerusalem to produce a white book of documents pertaining to the Holocaust, again published by Pergamon Press, 1988. In 1987, she then found the Journal for the Holocaust and Genocide Studies, first published by the Pergamon Press and then later on by Oxford University Press. And the year following that in London and in Oxford, she organizes a conference entitled Remembering for the Future, a world conference with the support, of course, of Robert Maxwell and the enormous resources provided by his media empire, and also, of course, with the support and alongside Elie Wiesel and others. It was a symposium that was intended to force the Lambeth Conference, which is the official meeting of the Anglican Church, to repent. She actually wrote this. This was published in a left-leaning publication. She wrote, quote, "Christians, through their churches and the whole of Christendom, are co-responsible for the Holocaust.